before I get started with the actual stream, just a quick disclaimer before we move forward here. For those of you who are either catching this live, or for those of you who are not catching this directly live right away, this is definitely one of those videos that I definitely wanted to get my thoughts out there. Like, I really, really think that should be heard, especially from coming from the perspective of someone like me, who is a late bloomer wrestling fan. And as I've always said before, with me being a late bloomer wrestling fan, I feel like there's moments, like great moments from the past, like the Austins, the Rocks, the Hogans, a lot of moments. But a topic like this that happened back in June of 2007, I feel like it's one that, I needed to watch this documentary that I watched last night to really feel what happened and the impact it's had on this business, as the eye-opener it was for sure, to myself as well. I've, of course, for the past 12 hours or so, have been watching other people's reviews on this documentary to hear their thoughts. And there are people who have experienced this 13 years ago, and 13 years later it still gets to them. And this was me actually getting like that eye opener of seeing what this turn of events did to not just the man involved, his family, but also for the wrestling industry in general. So, once again, if you have not done so already, make sure to check out this documentary, Dark Side of the Ring, Chris Benoit, parts 1 and 2, before proceeding forward in this video, if you do not want any spoilers. If not, then just, sit back and enjoy as I bring to you my thoughts on the Dark Side of the Ring, Chris Benoit documentary. What is going on? Once again, this is the Club of the Man 1993, and I am here live for, excluding my return video and my rebranding revealing video, this is the first special topic video I have done in quite a long time, since my return to YouTube about a month ago. And I feel like it's definitely a deep one, and definitely one that could create a lot of discussion, as well as like I said in the introduction, for us wrestling fans. Again, I am going to go back, as last night after I did my my TLC and my AEW Dynamite review, I sat down, and for the rest of the night before I fell asleep, sat down and watched the hour-and-a-half long 2-part documentary from Vice, Dark Side of the Ring, the Chris Benoit tragedy. As I said in the introduction, for those of you who do not know, I've only been a wrestling fan since 2013. I've only been watching full time since then. And yes, I have gone back and watched all the WrestleManias, all the Royal Rumble matches, all the SummerSlams, some other odds and ends here and there from back in the day. During the Attitude Era, the Ruthless Aggression Era, all that. And I like what I see. The problem is I still feel like to this day, I cannot appreciate those moments. Like, I probably could have if I was watching back then. Like, I appreciate the moments I do get now for what I do see now as a wrestling fan. And I feel like, there is, some, big turn of events that can really make you look at things a lot differently. You watch those documentaries or those movies that just really make you think. And I'll be honest and say I have not had too many of them. I'll give you an example before we're talking about this one. Back in 2012, my friend and I went to the movies to see that movie called For Greater Glory. And based off of the content in that movie, it was about, some war back in Mexico back in the 1920s, about like those who supported God and those who did not, basically all that stuff. And I remember watching that, and that movie really got to me because me personally, as being strong in my faith as I am, seeing the sacrifices some of the people made in that movie, I'm just like, it got me thinking, like, gosh, am I really that strong enough to do the same thing? That was me. So that was an example of like one of these movies that really get you to think and really like opens up your eyes. I was warned for days. This documentary, to me, was an eye-opener to me that definitely made me think a little bit more about what's going on in the wrestling industry today and back then. Because not only did we lose a hero in Chris Benoit from these turn of events, not only did we lose his wife and his son Daniel, we almost nearly lost the art of professional wrestling in general because of this. And I sit back now and I wonder, is part of the reason why the WWE dynamic has been super inconsistent over the past like 10 years or so since this went PG? Is this part of the reason why? But we're going to get into that a little bit further, as I first will talk about the entire documentary and what it opened up to. So most of the first part of part one, like part one was basically everything up to the day of the tragic event, June 21st, 2007, I believe the date was. And then like from that on, it was like the aftermath from everything. I felt, first off, from a production standpoint, this was an excellently done documentary, especially also to give you the feel for those who have not really heard the Chris Benoit story. Having like the idea of hiring actors, having like blurred out, reenacting those tragic moments, such as Chavo Guerrero going into the bathroom of Eddie's hotel room and Eddie dying in his arms, to the police searching the scene in Benoit's house whenever the welfare check was called to go check on him and whatnot, and the rest of the police who went in to figure out what happened after the neighbor went in. The first person they found dead was Daniel. To even like the interviews, just the emotional effects that still gets these people, such as Chris Jericho, JR, Jim Ross is in this, Sandra, Nancy's sister, Vicky Guerrero also, who played a prominent role in this documentary. And of course, the person that I felt the most for watching this was Dave Benoit, Chris Benoit's other son through Benoit's first marriage. So most of the first part of the documentary was just highlighting Benoit's career from his days in WCW, how how he became a wrestling fan and whatnot. He seemed to be very high on Dynamite Kid, which is where he got the diving headbutt from for his maneuver. One of his maneuvers he had. They obviously emphasize the bond he had with like Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, several other wrestlers who were just like him, smaller and not seen as people towards the end of WCW, to what we see now in WWE. People who get built for who are like 6'5", 250 pounds, like big strong boys. No Tyler Bate reference there. Were the ones that were getting the serious pushes in WCW. Well, like those core guys, like Benoit, Malenko, Eddie, Chavo Guerrero also as well, throw it out there. He played a prominent role in this as well, and I felt a lot for him. I'm sure of a lot of people to tell all the stories involved in this besides Dave Benoit. I'd say the next hardest was definitely Chavo, because of, how he experienced his uncle's death and the chilling messages he got on the day of Benoit's. So, obviously, these guys were trying to make the statements that, yes, they can literally, go into a company and make a difference and show that, people like their size, people of their stature that they're looked at, can succeed in this business. And that's what they did. Eddie and Benoit especially became two of the best in the business, for sure. They may not, of course, careers may be cut short, and Benoit will probably, and I would say, after seeing this, I don't ever see Chris Benoit getting to the WWE Hall of Fame. I do not. It's unfortunate, but I'll explain why when we get further. So, of course, there's also a storyline of how Chris Benoit met his wife, Nancy, who was originally with Kevin Sullivan. Kevin Sullivan had booked them involved in like an on-screen love story, basically. But through that, during this time, I guess Kevin Sullivan was had been abusive towards Nancy as well. And eventually, long story short, things transitioned, and Chris and Nancy fell in love. They got married. Benoit had been married before. I don't think I ever got to hear much about his first wife, but that's where his son, David Benoit, who's still alive, who, again, is a spitting image of Chris Benoit, looks exactly like him, was shown throughout this documentary. But through them, they had through Nancy and Chris, they had Daniel, the one who was showcased most in the one son that Benoit had killed that fateful night. So it continued to go on. Again, most of it establishes the bond with Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero. And, Jericho used to always say, Chris Jericho talked a lot about how Benoit would self-discipline himself a lot. There was one time where they had a match, and he did like some type of like a spinning heel kick, like similar to like the Black Mass or something like that Aleister Black does. And he missed by a mile. You can see in the slow motion thing, he missed Jericho's face by a mile. Jericho still sold like a pro, but Benoit was like, nope, that can't happen. He went to war with himself, basically, and Jericho walked in and saw him doing like 500 squats. He's like, what are you doing to yourself? It's like, I made a mistake, I must pay for it. I'm doing 500 squats to make sure I do better with that next time. This man had a love and a passion for professional wrestling. And the two things he loved most was his family and wrestling. But as time goes on, they continue to show the stronger bond with him and Eddie Guerrero. Best friends, grew up in this business together. With how much WWE superstars travel, they're around these people more than their actual families. So it seemed as if throughout the documentary, as it was established, Chris Benoit was very dependent on Eddie Guerrero in his wrestling career. They got everywhere together. They went from WCW back to WWE together. Eddie was fired briefly, but then he came back after he got his life under control, because he did have some drug and alcohol issues. But he got clean, he got his life under control, and he came back to WWE, and that's when he went on the run of his career for sure. And in 2004, at WrestleMania 20, both Eddie and Chris ended the show as world champions. Eddie on SmackDown as the WWE champion. Benoit, who had won the Rumble, was on SmackDown, but went to Raw, the challenge for the World Heavyweight Championship in that amazing triple threat match against Triple H and Shawn Michaels. And Benoit won by getting Triple H to tap out. Iconic moment, and that emotional end to the story. Both of them, again, grew up in this business together, did everything together. And it's, again, like I said, it's one of the two things that Benoit loved most, besides his family, wrestling. And the person he was getting through wrestling with was Eddie Guerrero. And of course, in 2005, which the chilling story with Chavo Guerrero telling the story about his uncle's death. The night before, him, Chavo, Benoit, and Eddie arrive at the hotel. They say, we'll meet down here at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, we'll do our workout. Around 5:45 in the morning, Chavo gets a call from hotel security saying, your uncle never answered his wake-up call. So he's like, what are you talking about? He didn't seem like he was too worried. So, they go to his hotel room, and it was the chain lock was shut. So they had to use a bolt cutter to break it open because obviously somebody was in the room. Came in, there was Eddie Guerrero face forward um, on the ground, just gurgling and just like still conscious but barely. Chavo turned him over, and then just oh gosh, the moments of Chavo just describing that moment of like turning Eddie over, seeing the light in his eyes just disappear, and watching his uncle die in his arms from heart failure was just chilling and tragic the way it was. And again, it's painful because that's one of two instances in the story I'm just like, geez, how does Chavo have a leveled head from after experiencing both of these tragedies? Because again, he wasn't at Benoit's house the day Benoit died, but he got the certain chilling text message that I will share when we get to the Benoit death. And then not long later, Benoit calls. He was down in the hotel lobby, and he says, "Hey, where are you guys at? What's going on?" Had no clue what was going on about this. Had no clue Eddie had died yet. The man that he depended on, the man that was getting him through wrestling with him, like Nancy was his wife outside of wrestling. I mean, even yes, they met through wrestling, but Nancy is his family. Eddie Guerrero is his family, but he was definitely the dependent. He depended on Eddie, as I said before, through wrestling. This was the day we can say that the real Chris Benoit died as well. He may have lived for 2 more years after this, but this was the day that Chris Benoit we all knew and we loved. The dedicated man towards wrestling. The ones who was like looking to put over anyone as well. Make others look good, with himself look good, be successful, make a difference in this wrestling industry. A hard worker and whatnot. Literally, dare I say this, the Daniel Bryan of the Ruthless Aggression era. Pretty much the Daniel Bryan of the Ruthless Aggression era. One of the best technical wrestlers of all time. When I say Chris Benoit, the 2 matches I think of is the triple threat match and any of his matches with Kurt Angle. Those are the ones that automatically in my head when I say Chris Benoit. This was the day though that Chris Benoit we knew had gone. It was gone, and we were never going to get that Chris Benoit back. Because when he called Chavo and said, "Hey, where you guys at? Get ready for that 7 o'clock workout that they were going to do." He says, "Man, are you sitting down?" Eddie's dead. And Chavo just said that Benoit just gave out this biggest wail and just absolutely broke down. Came up to the hotel room and just clutched onto Eddie. Again, Vicky took it hard. Nancy took it hard. The WWE Universe took it hard. For sure. The live announcement of Vince McMahon announcing about Eddie Guerrero's death and whatnot. But everybody kept saying Chris just was not the same. Jericho tells a story about how he remembers being at the funeral, and all Benoit could do was just clutch on to that casket any chance he could. He runs up to Jericho, gives him this big hug, like this biggest, don't let go me hug you could ask for. The thing was there comes a times in life where you lose someone that close. I'll be honest and say, in my time on Earth so far, knock on wood, well, as of now, could be changing soon because I currently right now have a family member who is very sick, and we don't know how much longer he has. And he's someone who I've been very close with for most of my life. It's one of my uncles. And right now, just knowing that his time is coming close, it's hard. I'm trying to prepare for it when it does happen and whatnot. But someone close like this, I don't know how that feels to for sure lose someone through death this close and this tragic. I mean, okay, yes, my situation I'm expecting to happen whenever, sometime soon. But Chris Benoit or Chavo Guerrero, well, especially this is Chris Benoit, did not expect to go to bed that night, to wake up the next morning, and to be waiting in the lobby for his 2 friends, the 2 people that he just has been dependent on in his wrestling career. He didn't expect to hear that one of them was gone, dead. He did not expect that at all. But the way he coped with it afterwards, he did not. And Jericho said it right, correctly from the beginning. He just did not handle himself well at all. Unfortunately, he did not. He should have, stayed away from wrestling, taken a break, taken some time to unwind, taken that time to, spend with his family, spend with the people that do love him, to, heal and know that this is what Eddie would want him to do. Instead, he continued on the road and wrestled, didn't spend as much time with his family, and he just kind of really distanced himself from who he really was. Yes, he loved wrestling, but he loved his family also. But he should not have gone back on the road and started wrestling as soon as Eddie's funeral was done. He should have taken the time to do what he needed to do. And Vicky Guerrero reiterated stories like, him, sitting in Eddie's gym and just collapsing, him going up to their bedroom, laying down and holding on to Eddie's pillows he would sleep with at night. This man was not the same without Eddie Guerrero. And he continued just to, just do mental damage to him, I hate to say. And then, of course, yes, he had a diary he'd write in. He'd be looking up scripture. And the thing was also, Eddie Guerrero was close to God. Vicky made it clear, Eddie was close to God. Chris Benoit was not that religious at all. But obviously, since he was so close with Eddie, he trusted Eddie. Eddie was someone who was just here, I know you can't force this on you, but I want you to share this higher power, basically, he finds through God. And, obviously, Benoit read scripture, but, we were hearing the stories about him getting in arguments with his wife, Nancy. They briefly had them separated for a while. There was a restraining order filed against him. He called Nancy's sister, Sandra, crying one day that he wanted the chance to get his wife back. They got back together a couple days later. Sandra to this day even says she wonders if that was the right idea. Wonders if Nancy could have still been here if it wasn't for that. Then we get to that weekend. I believe it was supposed to be having a pay-per-view in Houston, Texas. I believe it was Vengeance Night of Champions. It was around the time where Benoit was moving over to the ECW brand for WWE, and he was going to be the face of the ECW brand. He was supposed to face CM Punk in the ECW World Title match. Well, he had called some people and said that both Nancy and Daniel had a stomach virus or food poisoning and were being taken to the hospital. What we did not know was that Nancy and Daniel were already dead. I think the story was that Benoit had killed Daniel in his bedroom, and first killed his wife, strangled her, and I guess I forgot which drug it was, to Daniel in his bedroom. He placed Bibles by them, and then that Sunday morning when they had not heard from Benoit, the WWE had and Chavo Guerrero, the morning of Benoit's death, Chavo Guerrero had received the same text from Benoit's number and Nancy's number, saying something about the dogs are in the backyard by the pool, or something like that. And he was just like, what? All right, whatever. But he didn't think much of it. And it was around 5:30, 5:45 in the morning. He woke up to the text. The same time that Eddie passed, a couple years earlier. So they get to the pay-per-view. They're asking where Benoit was. He had not showed up. So they called the welfare committee or whatnot, asked him to go check on him, saying that he's missing, this is out of character for him. They were concerned. I guess they went to the Benoit house. There was a neighbor, I think, who was out for a walk, and they asked him, have you seen Mr. Benoit at all? He said, no. There was those dogs in the front yard. She hopped the fence, went inside. The first thing that happened was she came running back out of the house screaming, Daniel's dead. Daniel's dead. So then they have the police come. They search the house. They found Daniel dead, again, in his room, face down, with a Bible. They found Nancy dead, in her room, with a Bible. So the next question was, where was Chris? They searched all over the house, knocked down every door, could not find him. Finally, they found him. In his basement, in his gym, hung himself from one of his weightlifting machines. He literally, one of the ones that you can choose how much weight you want to put on to pull the bar down. He'd taken the bar off. He had wrapped the wire around his neck, put a towel around his neck, set the weights to 240 pounds, pulled the safety, hung himself while looking in the mirror. So at first, the thing was at first, WWE thought that this was a triple homicide or whatnot, or maybe this was a double murder homicide. Obviously, Nancy and Daniel were murdered, and it was obvious that Benoit had hung himself. So they actually went out on Raw, and keep in mind, this was during a time where there was supposed to be some kayfabe storyline where Vince McMahon was kayfabe dead and wasn't supposed to be really seen, which kind of ruined the Mr. Kennedy push for WrestleMania 24. But this is where Vince McMahon had to break character. They dedicated a 3-hour episode of Raw the following night to the life of Chris Benoit. They had people interviewing, like Chavo, saying, and like several other people, just saying all this great stuff about Benoit. To find out just a few hours later that Benoit was the killer. It was a double murder suicide. And it was just they couldn't wrap their minds around, like, why? Like, Benoit was one of the last, not that anyone would ever want to expect anyone to pull off something like this, but he literally was the last person on earth anybody would expect to do this. He loved his family. He loved his wife. He loved his kids. And then, the police had to get in touch with his son, David, who was with his other mother. And, he couldn't even believe it. Not just that his dad had died, but his dad had did it. That name for him, that Benoit name, has been just a burden on him for his life ever since. People have actually gone on Twitter and bullied him about this because of what his dad had did. To him, his dad's still his hero. But he still can't, he knows that the man who did this was not truly who his dad was. The fact that remains, though, is that Chris Benoit was still the man behind this terrible, horrific act. Autopsies had shown that he had a lot of testosterone in his body. And at the time, he even said this, it showed a text message he had sent to Nancy. He even said that the wellness policy was not taken seriously. After this, the WWE was knuckling down on the wellness policy. We see the suspensions we've got the past couple years. They are not taking that for granted at all, especially after this. With how many times, whenever they did an autopsy and saw that his brain had about 85 to 90% damage. It was literally the brain that looked similar to a 90-year-old with Alzheimer's. That's how bad of brain damage he had. This man literally, again, just did not cope the proper way with Eddie Guerrero. Even in that journal or that diary he was writing, it was like he was actually talking to Eddie. He even said, "We'll be together again soon." Did he want to go and be with Eddie? Did he want the two people he loved most, his wife and his son, that he created with Nancy, to go with him? Because, through wrestling he met his wife. Through wrestling he met Eddie, the guy that he depended on the most as a wrestler in his career. WWE never reached out also to the Benoit family, other than Chris Jericho and Chavo Guerrero. JR actually went to the wake to represent WWE. He was not welcome there at all. And to this day, the Benoit family, like, people in Benoit's family and stuff, just resent WWE for that. Even for a while, David couldn't appreciate wrestling like he could. And like I said, this guy has had to live with that last name, Benoit. And it's hard because, you look back and again, one of the best technical wrestlers ever. Ever. If this did not happen, this man would have been a Hall of Famer. Because of this horrific act, despite the fact that he was a great man, great wrestler, the guy literally, again, killed his wife, his son, and himself. And because of that, WWE can't even associate with him anymore, unfortunately. And it's sad. You see him in the ring. You see the man that we all know he was. The man that he was when this happened was not who he truly is. And that's how he's going to be marked as for forever. I mean, even people said, we got to focus on the biggest victims here, which were Nancy and Daniel. And I agree. Nancy, who was involved in wrestling at one point, could be in the Hall of Fame. Chris Benoit can't. Chris Jericho, of course, goes on to mention how, he felt, even 13 years later, this still affects a lot of people. And there's even a moment where where David just broke down, and Sandra was there, and she actually had hugged him, and just showed that she was still there. Because up until about recently, David had not really associated with his dad's side of the family at all. They didn't. It was Chris Jericho who helped them reconnect. And between the two of them, Sandra and David, they've gone to wrestling events again. They've gained that love for it again. And I am hoping, after seeing this documentary, David Benoit's biggest goal is to be a professional wrestler himself. And for him someday to erase the awful taste of the Benoit name and have it be a positive in the wrestling industry. I really hope and pray that he does get to achieve that. I definitely still appreciate in the ring what Chris Benoit did for this business. But it's hard to still do so. Because think about this also. The media and everything went after wrestling, saying that head injuries and whatnot. CT, they talk about, CT or CTE. Chavo Guerrero even said, yeah, there's a good chance he may have that as well. But, obviously, it shakes him up because, makes us think that he's not going to do something like this. He would never do something like this, but it's just painful to think. You would not expect a man like Chris Benoit to pull off such a heinous and tragic and traumatic looking act like he did. So obviously they're saying, head injuries no good cause. They talked about, chair shots. This is around the time where they really knuckled down on chair shots to the head. And probably about a year later is when WWE went PG. And you kind of wonder to this day, and I'm starting to wonder now as well after seeing this, because literally the way people ripped on wrestling after this, blaming that, if it's basically if we can't completely hold Benoit accountable for his actions because of his head injuries and whatnot, and his mental health issues he obviously had, then they had to put some blame on wrestling. And because of that, the wrestling industry almost died because of this. And it makes me kind of wonder, could this be why WWE is so inconsistent with their dynamic anymore? Could this be why people aren't getting over anymore, or why things seem so toned down? One week it feels like it's an edgy product, next week it feels like it's a kids show. I mean, yes, even before all this happened, Vince McMahon came out on live TV and he was out of touch. There was a lot of bad creative already going on. But you kind of wonder, does this whole incident still kind of, trigger onto someone's mind still? And it just may never, wear off completely. Again, I said before, you saw how effective this was on whenever, David Benoit or Chris Jericho or Sandra or anybody else who was interviewed in this documentary. Or even like I said, I've watched some people who've been watching wrestling longer than me give their thoughts on this and how it still affects them. Again, I've only been fans since 2013, and yes, I knew the Chris Benoit tragedy, but to me, the whole event just didn't hit home until watching this. And I'm glad I did, to get a better understanding and actually feel like I can, understand the situation a lot more. And it's just what I've always felt about, depression or, like people with mental health. It's not something just to take for granted, people. I'll give you an example personally for me. Like, I go back to saying how, Chris Benoit did not handle himself well from Eddie's death, for sure. He should have been spending more time with his family, finding the healing, finding the people who he still are dependent on and can rely on to be there for him and to help him, feel strong. I'm going to give a brief example with me. I've been in 2 relationships in my entire life. 2, legitimate dating relationships. The first one was back in high school. Only lasted 10 days, but I had already gone through 6 months of trying to earn this girl. And when she broke up with me, I spent the rest of that summer in my home miserable. Didn't want to go out, did not want to do anything. The second relationship I was in, which ended 2.5 years ago, and it was a lot longer than just 10 months. It was a 2.5-year relationship, but it had been 5 years of us even trying to get there, basically. So altogether, 5 or 6 years this girl's in my life. And after that, one thing I did better that time around, despite it being longer term and a lot harder to get over, I made sure to dedicate time to spending with the people I know in my life that I have earned because the person who I am. And that's why I cherish my friends. I cherish, people here on YouTube who support me. I cherish those I know that I've earned in my life because of me being me. And that's unfortunately the path that Chris Benoit did not take when Eddie died. He continued to do the one thing that him and Eddie were able to do, and that was wrestling. But the more he did it, the more distant he became from who he was. And it just ate him alive. It literally just ruined himself mentally, unfortunately. And for him to pull off this act, if Benoit was not the killer, he would be in the Hall of Fame easily. But unfortunately, that's not going to be the case for him. He's never going to be in the Hall of Fame. What he did, yes, this document ended with Sandra being asked if she could ever forgive him. She goes, "I do pray that day comes when I can get down and pray to God that I can forgive Chris. It may be tomorrow, maybe in a few years. It's definitely not today. But, like I said before, people with mental health issues, there's people out there with that. It's not something to joke about or, take for granted for sure. That's why I really have a soft spot for people like that. Because, people who have this underdog mentality to them, I see it in a lot of people like that. They need that reassurance that people are there. That they have a much more purpose than those that they were dependent on and whatnot. And it's just a shame. Again, if you have not yet watched, which if you still chose to watch this video after beginning the disclaimer at the beginning, if you have not watched it yet, it's free on YouTube right now. Make sure to search Dark Side of the Ring, Chris Benoit. Both parts of this documentary are available from Vice for free right now on YouTube. I highly recommend checking this out for us wrestling fans, even if you don't even know who Chris Benoit was. I definitely recommend watching this, as it will open your eyes to a lot of things that you may not have realized, like I did before watching this. And I hope that this video also gave you a perspective on just from a late bloomer fan who, again, didn't completely experience this. Watching this though, by the production way it was shot and whatnot, and how it was panned out, really made me feel it, and I can still appreciate more what we've gotten from wrestling since all this. There could have maybe been no Daniel Bryan or no CM Punk. Well, CM Punk was starting out at the time, because he was supposed to face CM Punk at that last pay-per-view that was there before his death. That he was supposed to face Punk on that show for the ECW World Title. No Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, no Shield. We wouldn't have had the Undertaker's streak snapped. No Brock Lesnar. No Keith Lee. No NXT. Nothing. We have not experienced the moments we've experienced since, and that's the key thing. The stuff we've experienced since. There's times in our lives where we're just down in our dark moments, feeling like we have no purpose. But then when you look back on everything that's happened after that, and feeling what you've accomplished, the people you've met, the bonds you've grown, the stuff you've earned by being you, that's what really can make you appreciate life. That's what makes you strong. Don't ever be afraid to reach out to the ones that love you, or to find somebody to confide in, or if it's a family member or a friend or even a therapist or whatnot. Just don't be afraid to live your life the way you're supposed to, because this is just a sad story. A man that everybody loved in the ring and outside the ring ended his life and his wife and his son's life the last way anybody expected to happen, because he loved them. And that's really all I gotta say. This was a lot longer than I expected it to be, but that's my thoughts on The Dark Side of the Ring, Chris Benoit, parts 1 and 2. Again, make sure to go back and watch this documentary for sure if you have not done so. My friends highly recommended it to me. Even some people on YouTube here did recommend it to me. I felt I had to go back and do so, and I'm giving you my thoughts here. I would like to hear your thoughts as well, guys. What were your thoughts on this documentary? What are your thoughts on the whole Chris Benoit tragedy and the whole story? How do you think it has impacted the wrestling business since? Would you like to see David Benoit become a successful wrestler someday to erase the Benoit name as a black mark in wrestling history? What do you think would have happened if none of this happened? Or just anything in general? Leave me your thoughts, please, down in the comment section below of anything regarding the Chris Benoit story. Or if you're like a late bloomer wrestling fan like me who didn't experience it, but got the eye opener watching this show, leave those thoughts as well. Just leave me any thoughts you have, guys, regarding this, and I look forward to definitely hearing what you guys have to say. Make sure to slap a like on the video as well. Subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter at DemandAirBond93. And with that, guys, I will see you all later. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe out there, and remember, cherish definitely the ones that you love. Make sure to know who the people you are. Know people you've earned in life. You've earned by being you. And make sure to cherish those moments, even during times of grief and times of heartbreak, times of loss. Just know that there's more people out there that can definitely help you keep going. And that's the one thing, the one message I will leave with you. Yeah, no one will surprise. There's no escape.